Sometimes the quietest towns hide the loudest ghosts. In Milbrook, Pennsylvania, where the streetlights flickered out by midnight and the diner closed at 9, a single mother named Margaret Sullivan stared at a cracked phone screen and saw something that would change everything. St. Catherine's Church, $2,500, as is. The photo was gray and lifeless, a stone building swallowed by ivy, its steeple fractured, its windows shattered like glass eyes that had seen too much. But Margaret couldn't look away. Maybe it was exhaustion, 3 jobs, 2 kids, and rent that bled her dry. Or maybe it was that strange human instinct that hears a whisper where others hear silence. Everyone said the church was cursed. Everyone said nothing good ever came from Piedmont Avenue. But Margaret was done believing what everyone said. She closed her eyes and for a moment imagined sunlight through stained glass, a place where something broken could still be beautiful. And when she opened them again, her finger was already hovering over the contact agent button. Without realizing, she had just bought a ticket into history's most buried secret. 3 weeks later, the wind screamed across the empty cemetery as Margaret turned the key and pushed open the church doors. The hinges wailed like something alive. Inside, the air was cold, heavy with the scent of dust and wet stone. Pews lay toppled like bones, hymnals disintegrated into gray pulp, and graffiti whispered the names of kids who dared each other to step inside. A stained glass window still clung to its color, a saint watching in fractured light as if judging her intrusion. Margaret's heart pounded as she walked down the center aisle. Beneath her boots, the wooden floor groaned, old and resentful. At the altar, she noticed something strange. A patch of stone darker than the rest, seams sealed with a waxy film. She knelt, brushed away the dust, and felt it give. A crack echoed through the church as she pried it open. Beneath there was nothing but black, a staircase vanishing into the earth. Margaret stood at its edge, her phone trembling in her hand. She knew she should call someone. She didn't. Instead, she pointed the light downward and began to descend. The deeper she went, the colder it became. Her breath turned to fog. The light from her phone quivered across wet brick walls that hadn't been touched in a century. At the bottom, an iron-banded door waited, swollen with rust sealed by time itself. She grabbed the handle and pulled. The hinges shrieked as it gave way, releasing a rush of air so old it smelled like a tomb. What she saw inside stole the sound from the world. The room was small, circular, its walls lined with shelves stacked to the ceiling, each one overflowing with objects wrapped in brittle cloth. Gold glinted through decay, chalices, crucifixes, jeweled boxes, manuscripts bound in leather so worn the words had faded to ghosts, and on the wall a single framed letter yellowed with age. To whomever finds this, these items are not stolen but saved. Let no man claim them for greed but only for restoration. Father Thomas Brennan, 1873. Margaret's hands shook as she traced the name. She didn't know it then, but she was standing on the edge of one of the greatest rediscoveries in American history, buried beneath a church the world had forgotten. For 3 sleepless nights, Margaret lived between fear and wonder. She documented everything, filling notebooks with sketches and photos, cross-referencing dates she barely understood. The story began to take shape. 1873. The Catholic missions burned during the Indian Wars, priceless relics hidden before the flames. Father Brennan had smuggled them east, sealing them beneath his church to preserve what history had nearly erased. When she showed the photos to Dr. Richard Peaton, a historian specializing in religious artifacts, the color drained from his face. "Margaret," he whispered, "you have no idea what you found." They returned together, cataloging the relics one by one, each piece whispering a fragment of a story that had cost lives to keep. But word spread like fire. Reporters appeared on Piedmont Avenue. The mayor claimed the fine for the town. The diocese demanded it as church property. Strangers called her a liar, a thief, a woman too small for the miracles she'd uncovered. But Margaret knew what Father Brennan's letter had meant. Not for greed, for restoration, and she would protect that promise, even if it destroyed her. The first lawsuit came like a thunderclap, the Diocese of Allegheny versus Margaret Ann Sullivan. They wanted everything, and they had power, lawyers, and the pulpit. Margaret had a small-town attorney who charged by the hour, and a heart that refused to fold. Then came Jennifer Kwan, sharp, relentless, and unwilling to see another institution crush an ordinary woman. "You bought the church. You own the church," she said. "Let's make them prove otherwise." The courtroom became a battlefield of faith and law. The diocese called it sacred property. Jennifer called it negligence, abandoned by those who'd sworn to protect it. When the judge finally ruled, her words were clear. The church had relinquished its claim. The artifacts belonged to Margaret Sullivan. Cameras flashed, headlines screamed, but Margaret didn't celebrate. She only sat on the courthouse steps, trembling, the echo of Father Brennan's words haunting her like a prayer. Let it remain until it can be returned. Winning, she realized, was only the beginning. Freedom became duty. Margaret refused to sell the artifacts. Instead, she formed a coalition. Historians, tribal representatives, preservationists, calling it the Brennan Legacy Project. Together they began tracing the origins of every relic. Some were returned to pueblos in New Mexico and Arizona. Others were displayed in Milbrook under glass, not as treasure but as testimony. Each return was a ceremony, solemn, wordless, sacred. Elders wept as they touched what their ancestors had once held. In those moments, Margaret understood why Brennan had hidden it all. Not to keep history safe from time, but from people. Her church became a sanctuary again, though no one came to pray, only to remember. Outside, the world called her a hero, a thief, a symbol. Inside, she sat alone at the altar and whispered to the empty air, "I kept your promise, Father. And if you'd been there, standing in the shadows of those restored windows, you'd swear the light shifted, like someone had just said thank you." Years passed, and the St. Catherine's Cultural Heritage Center stood like a heartbeat in the center of Milbrook, a reminder that something once forgotten could be reborn. The town thrived again. Tourists came to see the woman who'd turned a curse into history. Children ran through the aisles where Margaret once cried alone. And one afternoon an old man arrived unannounced, a weathered face, trembling hands. "My name is Michael Brennan," he said softly. "Thomas was my great-great-uncle." He told her how their family never knew what became of him, how shame had buried his story. Margaret led him into the crypt. When he saw the letter framed on the wall, he wept. He died believing no one would ever understand. Margaret placed her hand on his shoulder. He was wrong. That night, as she locked the museum doors, the wind outside howled through the trees, but inside, the silence was calm, almost sacred. The curse was gone. Only legacy remained. Sometimes the most extraordinary stories begin in the smallest, quietest places, like a forgotten town or an old church someone once called cursed. Margaret Sullivan didn't find treasure. She found truth. She proved that doing what's right doesn't always make you rich, but it makes you remembered. The relics she restored now live where they belong, in the hands of those who'd lost them. And that church, the one she bought for $2,500, stands as proof that redemption is never cheap, but always worth the cost. So tonight, as you sit wherever you are, maybe driving down an empty road, maybe lying in bed with the lights off, ask yourself, where are you listening from, and what time is it right now? Because somewhere someone just like Margaret is standing at the edge of their own darkness, wondering whether to step forward. If this story found you tonight, maybe it's because you were meant to hear it. Subscribe, stay with us, because tomorrow we'll open another door, and who knows what light or shadow waits below.